my time.
Yeah. Welcome back. You're watching Morning Prime, all to do with global today. We're definitely taking a look at what's fresh off the press in case you're just joining us, but equally focus on global matters. And right before the break, we were talking about all to do with matters, global concern, and an interesting comment was made by the gentleman right here, and we definitely appreciate your input. African prosperity with African characteristics, zero exploitation. Interesting. So I hope you're definitely getting value for your time back at home, even as we continue discussing about such matters.
I hope you're going to tweet that.
Should I give you credit?
No, give the panel the credit. The panel is always, the credit goes to the panel.
Yeah.
Never to an individual.
Okay.
That's an African characteristic. That's what I'm talking about.
I'm being schooled, as you can see, but you would never cease to learn, as they say. So, gentlemen, I think we should shift focus to matters Nigeria, because
before yeah. I think John here had a powerful point that he made. And the point was, we need to rethink agriculture. I don't think, either from a political dividends point of view or from a policy accuracy perspective, that Ruto won anything by giving Kenyans fertilizers. Because you're giving fertilizers in the midst of drought. So it didn't
help.
Well, I can sympathize with my brother because
it benefited the supplier.
Maybe the supplier, but I can sympathize with him because had he won had it rained so heavily when he won the election, then the kind of discourse we are having would not be there, because we'll not be talking about agriculture. The downside to it is that the weather and the gods have not been kind to the hustlers.
Despite the prayers.
I don't want to go that way, but I would say, prayers or no prayers, the gods have not been kind to the hustlers, because it should have rained. And if it rained, the fertilizers would have been useful. What does that tell us? We need to begin to go the way Dr. Kitui is mentioning here, that we need to rethink our agriculture. And how do we do that? We have to do it out of the box. And there are models. And we've said this before. America was food deficient economy for hundreds of years. Since the colonialists settled there, America was a food deficient economy until Roosevelt came into the picture and thought that we need to transform agriculture. What did he do? He didn't give people fertilizers. He didn't give people seeds. He didn't give people land to cultivate. He didn't create settlements. He created enablers of agriculture. Enablers. Among the enablers was water. So he created all dams and the Sea Valley Authority and all that to avail water to those who want to do agriculture. That you'll never be limited by that. Two, he brought power, energy to the rural areas. So that in those Tennessee Valley Authority, you have energy, you have water. So whatever you want to do with it. Thirdly, he created a market for food products. Wheat, barley, corn, and what the Americans eat. What that meant is that he pumped money, rather than pumping money to manufacturers of unga and other things here, you pump it to the market. You buy, if today, William Ruto bought a sack of maize at 80,000 Kenya shillings, fixed, that anybody who grows maize for the next 20 years is going to have it sold to the government at 8,000 Kenya shillings. And the government sell it back to the manufacturer or whatever at the normal price of the market, like 2,000 or 3,000. Then you control the corrupt fellow. Obviously, at that rate, nobody will import maize. Can I tell you? You'll find in Garissa will be competing with Kiambu on maize production through irrigation and other means, because Tana River just passes through there. You get it? That is what Roosevelt did. People left New York they left Chicago, they left Los Angeles and went to the Midwest, arguing that we want to bring our families up. We want to have, it is this a friend for family. But the issue was simply that there were incentives. And from that time on, all humanitarian assistance in terms of wheat, in terms of maize, in terms of everything, oil, is coming from the United States from that point on. And therefore, if you have to prepare Kenya for its greatness in the on, you have to make it food surplus, not food deficient. And making it food deficient requires doing what Dr. Kitui is telling us. Think outside the box in terms of agricultural policy. It's not giving subsidies. It is not, subsidies are necessary, but you have to know where to give the subsidies. Subsidies for Kenyans is what works. I am not a maize farmer, but can I tell you the truth? If tomorrow you are selling a sack, you are buying a sack at 10,000 Kenya shillings or 8,000 Kenya shillings, I'll stop doing the cows and I'll start growing maize because it's a 3-month crop and I'll become a millionaire within a short time. That will shift the imbalance we have between technology, the Safaricom and others, to now agriculture. And the hasra will rise. Because with the food and with income that is sustainable from food production, then coffee, tea, and everything will be on a level playing field. Why don't you read the manual of Roosevelt? Jill should have come with that copy to give to the hustlers. You see how the Americans became food sufficient. Yeah. Not going to Kibera or whatever to Kajiado to Rament. Yeah. Bring us the copy. All right. We read. Briefly, yeah.
I think someone should check on my fact. I think either Saudi Arabia is close to Kenya as far as food exports is concerned, or it surpassed Kenya. I just didn't check. So you know Saudi Arabia where it is, right? There's only sand in Saudi Arabia. So there is no excuse. Israel has no rain 365 days of the year. Forget about Saudi Arabia, which is just sand. Do you know what they've done? They created little tents. They bought sand from South America and East Africa, and then they planted maize. They are an exporter of food to the Middle East and to the rest of the world. Rain is not an issue in agriculture. No. Government is. Competent governments are. Yeah. This is a very important point for us to know. Because, you know, if we look at the cycle of rain and say we're going to develop, we need rain, and this is how we're going to make food, the thinking of us going to Mars will not come. Because, you know, people are planting food in Mars. Just in case this country, the Russians and the Americans start shooting each other with nuclear weapons. We'll probably have ships, they're going to go to Mars. They're going to leave us here. Now, it's very important. There's a René Descartes said that cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. I think it's very important for public policy to be based on the ideas of political economy. And to get a political class whose cultural interpretation of reality and history is different from the one of Mr. Courier at Trade Ministry. It's different from the county council, the governors of northern Kenya, who have looted the money there. So our friend Lusaka can come here, Kitui can come here and tell us about drought. It's not the drought, it's the money that is building apartments in Dubai, South Sea, that has been looted from the counties of the people of northern Kenya. That has brought drought. And Garissa today, hundreds and hundreds of mothers have walked 500 kilometers. It would be immoral for me not to talk about this. My faith tells me to talk about it. My individuality tells me to talk about it. They stole the money and now they are claiming that the central government should come and help them. Where is the money from devolution? Look at the charts that of the money that have been given to northern Kenya. Huh? Why are they fighting in Pokot? Because they looted the money for the children. In Samburu, they did. In all the counties, money was taken away. Let's not even talk about Nairobi, because the infrastructure in Nairobi is now completely destroyed. It's the one that the white man built here in the 1940s and 30s. My grandfather was one of the founders of this town, so I know. So I think that we should not come and talk about the good things, because the bad things are overwhelming, the bad things are not good. The country is in malaise. The political leadership is fighting over petty things like mass action. The president is busy running after people who said A, B, or C about him. He should just focus on where he wants to take the country and forget all these sideshows. Right. And I think that if we, the first thing I think is that there needs to be an economic roundtable, some of the best economists in our region, to sit down and think about where the economy of East Africa is going to go. My contribution would be that we should collapse all the borders, and your passport should be the color of your skin. Yeah, because that's what happens in Canada. When you cross the border, they don't talk to you. That's before 9/11. They'll say, where are you from? I'm from Edmonton. And where are you going? You're going to New York. And he goes. You know what is the trade between the United States and Canada at the Peace Bridge? It's $1 billion a day. Why? Because they don't stop traffic. They don't stop them. You just go. Okay. There's a little card, you know, where we got this highway thing. It's from there. So you just pass, you take your goods, you come back. We need to crush these borders. Then we need to have one currency, the East African shilling, or the East African pesa, because shilling is more European. Pesa. And we need regional citizenship. My senior learned's contribution to our political economy. Yeah. So these are the things that we need to do. We do not need 3 East African cabinet secretaries. Why do we need three East African cabinet secretaries? Why? Why? You see, that's the incompetence that we have in this country. Why should we have 3 different budget days? We should have 1 finance minister, 1 East African, and we should have sub-directors from the countries. Nobody should ever ask me a passport to go to Mogadishu and come back to Nairobi. I'm a Somali. Why should I be asked for a passport in Mogadishu? We're all the same people here. Mr. Kitui's cousins are over there. You remember Moody Awori? He landed in Uganda and his brother was the minister who welcomed him. It's just a fact. The first agriculture minister who did the best job in Tanzania is called something Mwangi. They got him here from Moranga. It's a fact. Ask him. Okay. So, you know, what I'm saying is that we need to bring to the contribution something called truth-telling. If we tell the truth about our problems, we will be able to look for solutions to them. We don't need farming, subsistence farming in Kenya anymore. We need workers who can get on a train from Kijabe and come to an industry and work and get paid a decent salary. These are the kinds of things we need to do. And if we continue on this managing poverty business, then we're not going to go very far. I put it to you, Rogers. Go ahead.
Think long term. Anyway, proper points right there. Gentlemen, let's shift focus to Nigeria. We have 30 minutes or so to discuss what's happening right there, all to do with the election that was conducted on February 25th. Vote counting is underway, even as various reports from various media outlets that are following up, including Al Jazeera, sort of hinting at a victor. And I just want to perhaps read it to you, the latest from the election that was conducted on February 25th. And all you need to know, there you have it, just briefly.
Can I say something really quickly about that before I give it to Dr. Kitui?
Yeah.
The Nigeria is the sick man of Africa.
Despite having the largest economy.
It does not have the largest economy. It has an economy of corruption. Its economy should have been 100 times that size. Some of the richest people in the world are Nigerians. They live in London. If the billionaires in Nigerians took all their money and invested in Nigeria in infrastructure, they would build roads in every part of Nigeria. They would build bridges in every part of Nigeria. They would build everything in Nigeria.
And electricity.
Just the individuals who have stolen the money. Can you imagine the amount of oil that Nigeria has sold since independence? Trillions of dollars. Where is it? It's in the banking system in London. This comes from our colonial mentality. You know, they came here and they told us, oh, you're black, you have a big nose, you're silly.
Okay.
And therefore, we cannot. So this mentality is what leads to corruption. I am not kidding. Frantz Fanon, in his book Les Damnés de la Terre, tells us about it, the psychological problems of nationalism, how the chief wants to become the president. And if we don't be radical, we have to be radical, we have to be revolutionary, because our conditions are. I am a liberal. I believe in the free market, I believe in prosperity, I believe in having a big house in Kiambu and having multiple wives. But we cannot do that while the rest of the country is wallowing in poverty. And therefore our thinking has to be revolutionary. It has to be radical so that we can become capitalists. That's what we want to be. We want prosperity. And if we want prosperity, it is not only socialism that is radical. Capitalism is also quite a radical idea. You know, to be militant about being to have prosperity is a good thing. Before, people used to be militant about sharing. We cannot share this thing if there's only one of it. We need to have 100 of these pies so that we can all have a pie. So at the end of the day, the Nigerian issue is that the same grey man of the same ruling party, Buhari, who has done nothing for Nigeria in the last 10 years, he could not even control the militants in the Boko Haram. What is this new party going to do for Nigeria? Nothing. And on top of that, they're stealing the election. There's huge voting irregularities in Nigeria.
Definitely.
And until Nigeria stands up, out of every 5 African, 1 is a Nigerian. And until Nigeria stands up, West Africa will not stand up. Until Kenya stands up, East Africa will not stand up. Until South Africa continues to the path of Nelson Mandela, South Africa will not stand up. And Zimbabwe will still be in that problem. Until Egypt ends dictatorship, Northern Mediterranean Africa will not wake up. These are not crazy things I'm saying. They're just facts.
Okay. So the latest from the Nigerian election, perhaps just to update our viewers as Prof and Dr. Kitui come in, Nigeria's INEC has declared Bola Tinubu of the All Progressive Congress the winner of the 2023 election.
Goodness.
And that's according to Al Jazeera. But of course, as I mentioned a little bit earlier on, the opposition parties are definitely contesting this particular victory, mentioning that there was a lot to do with vote manipulation. They say it's heavily doctored and manipulated. That happened in a joint press conference in the capital, Abuja, just yesterday, in case you were following up on that. And taking a look at some of the issues that perhaps put the predecessor, the outgoing President Buhari, into power. Fixing the state of the economy. He was really big on that. As I was looking back into what he actually promised, would you say this has been done? Equally, the state of insecurity in the country, and I mean, we've seen a couple of offices for the electoral body actually raided by gunmen in this particular election. So if you summarize this whole debacle, how would you put it?
Well, let's start by acknowledging that I don't agree with Hashi that Nigeria is a sick man of Africa. You just summarize it the way its most eminent scholar summarized it, Chinua Achebe, say the trouble with Nigeria is simply and squarely a problem of leadership. That's it. That's how he summarized it. And Nigeria has never overcome that problem of leadership. And the reason why it's a problem of leadership is because Nigeria has everything that makes for a superpower. In terms of population, it's very high. It's the most populous country in Africa. Second, in terms of resources, the second largest river on the continent, River Niger, passes through Nigeria. That's why it is called Nigeria, because the river actually cuts across the country. And much of the country is in the rainforest. So we're not really talking about food sufficiency. 2, 3, it has the best oil. It's not just oil, but the best that drives American. It's the cleanest, it is the best, and it's the most prized anywhere in the world. And fourthly, Nigeria has the largest human capital in the world. Perhaps every fifth of an international worker, civil servant, is a Nigerian. Every of the 5 African intellectuals in the United States must be a Nigerian. The Britain and so on and so forth. So Nigeria has everything for it. What doesn't work it is because of the leadership. What does that mean for this election? Nigerians put the best they could have done in this. First, they brought the technology into electronic, the BVAS. They are calling the BVAX. The meaning that your biodata is what is captured. So when you say that it was rigged, then it must have been rigged at another level, because those who voted are supposed to be visible. And the figure that was voting is huge. Perhaps that's where the problem comes in. 85 million Nigerians were eligible to vote. When we're talking about 20,000 here, 20 million here, Nigeria, there's 85 eligible voters in that country. But obviously, the opposition divided the vote. Peter Obi of the Labour Party, basically, he's actually the one who might have gotten this election going, because he was extremely popular among the. That's what he failed in this country.
He came in third, by the way, according to the presidential results.
But coming third with his popularity meant that you carry his vote and that of the losing party, and they win. Because and for them, they have the first past the post. Look at the vote that Peter Obi got, the Labour Party, and what was gotten by Atiku Abubakar.
Atiku Abubakar 6.9, Peter Obi 6.1.
Yes.
And the winner, Bola
not much of a difference.
8.7.
8.7.
So,
not much of a difference.
No, that tells you that they would have won overwhelmingly. But from the beginning, those who were observing the Nigerian election knew that the winner is going to come from the ruling party, because it has the incumbent advantage, and these ones have squarely divided the vote. So that is how it was lost. So it's not about the election being stolen. If it was stolen, it is the level of manipulation of Peter Obi, because he comes from very popular areas, and he was very popular among the young people. So that's one of the factors. Obviously, the other factor is the incumbency. The incumbency is such that they would like to. There was the whole idea that we don't want a northerner again. So Abubakar, the ratio factor, the identity factor. We have had a northerner Buhari. We cannot have another. And Peter Obi was not powerful enough to defeat Abubakar. So that is, again, another factor in Nigeria. And Nigeria is more divided than any other African country on the north-south divide. The Muslim and the rest factor.
Christian South, yes.
Because not everybody is a Christian. The Muslim and other factor is very strong also in that country. So Nigeria should be given an opportunity to go on, because there is no perfect democracy anywhere. Nigeria should now put its act together. But what does Nigeria very quickly represent in Africa? It represents something that the British scholar Nick Cheesman summarized the other day, which is called hegemonic instability. A hegemonic instability means that a country that is supposed to be a pivot of peace and security in a region is itself facing serious instability questions. Kenya, South Africa, if you look at what Julius Malema and others are doing to Ramaphosa and so on, the internal instability in South Africa is walling. Right? Yet South Africa is supposed to be the regional power in Southern Africa, the hegemon, that is holding that region together on behalf of the continent. Here, we started off very well by accepting the results of the election. Raila Odinga going for his small holidays with his family, then another tour to South Africa, Ruto touring Nyanza, and we thought all was good and well until the 23rd of January. And we are now entering into another area of hegemonic instability. Nigeria has not been able to rein in the Boko Haram. It has not been able to ensure security within the country. Just before the election, 10,000 people were hacked to death by bandits or thugs. So insecurity within the country related to just criminal, enterprises has made in Nigeria a bad area to invest. Nigeria should not collapse. Nigeria should start, because when Nigeria was in the hands of the military juntas, what happened? The rest of West Africa went into military juntas, except Senegal. The rest of the country in West Africa faced at least one coup per country. From Burkina Faso, whether you are Francophone or you are Anglophone, Ghana was changing military chiefs like the way we are changing civilians. So, or the way we change our suits whenever we have many. So, the big question, the big issue here is that the stability of Nigeria reflects greatly on Africa. Two countries define Africa. One is Nigeria, the other one is DR Congo. The Democratic Republic of Congo and the Republic of Nigeria define the African continent. We wish them well so that Africa can have a good image globally, if nothing else.
Just a few thoughts.
Yeah.
So Winston Churchill says democracy is the worst form of government,
Yes.
except for all the others.
Yeah.
And while many of us believe in democracy, and I agree with Professor Kagwanja, Nigeria should not be allowed to fail. And while many of us believe in democracy, the hegemonic instability that Professor Kagwanja says, and that we see all over, whether it's in East Africa, West Africa, Southern Africa, makes that faith in democracy a bit difficult to sustain. And personally, sometimes I always wonder, is democracy really, was it the right form of government for Africans? Or can we be creative? Can we have a governance with the African, how do I use the quote of Hashi, the African characteristics, acknowledging that we are ethnic and we are tribal in how we think, in a very positive way, not just saying one person, one vote. No, we don't vote as one person, one vote. In Nigeria, they vote as one religion, one vote, or one region, one vote, or one state, one vote. How do we make sure that our political systems acknowledge these very unique characteristics of Africans? I don't think the one person, one vote characteristic is very African. I think it contributes to part of the governance failure on the continent. It contributes to part of the leadership failure on the continent. And I think our political scientists need to also be very creative and innovative in terms of thinking, where do we go from here? Now, the crisis we see in Nigeria, you can draw parallels with what's happening in Kenya, but also in other regions as well. It's a battle between what one would call economic elites and then the masses who feel disenfranchised or left behind by 50 or 60 or 70 years of post-independence failure for governments to work for the people. Whether it's increasing cost of living. At some point, Nigeria had an inflation of 21%. I think it was in October last year or so. And the people just saw their purchasing power just lost completely. And it's just the ordinary citizens really who lose. As Hashi was saying, there's a lot of Nigerians who are rich, who are all over the world, but that wealth is not working for the people. But it's because what we've ended up with on the African continent after the elections is that we've lost the true democrats who really fought and meant well for this continent, and it has been replaced by either kleptocrats who just get into power because they want to enrich themselves using the state machinery, or plutocrats who are rich people who just want to capture the state so that they protect their wealth and the riches. That's a tragedy we are facing. So when you look at Tinubu and Obi in Nigeria, Tinubu represents the status quo. Tinubu represents the political elites, the economic elites who have come behind him to really support him and make sure that their interests are protected. Peter Obi, on the other hand, represents the masses, the people who had hope in, can we make the government work for us? The hustler nation of Nigeria was behind Obi. And I think we can draw parallels in Kenya as well, where in the last elections, I think the hustler nation was behind Ruto. We have to make the bottom-up approach work for us. For the first time, can we get the dynasties out of the table? Let's elect someone who's self-made, who used to sell chicken in somewhere in Eldoret, who's made himself up the ladder. Let's elect one of our own so that we can make the economy work for us. And I think that's basically, I think that's the hope that Kenyans are lying on Kenya, that we can make this government work for everybody and not just for the few plutocrats or for the few kleptocrats that we've elected. Nigeria is the same. And I think for me, it's yes, we can now allow it to continue. But I think the question we have to work is, how do we make our governments work for everybody? That's the biggest question. How do we bring ideology back into government? Because I think we've lost it, or maybe we've replaced it with a very misconstrued ideology about what governments and what the role of the governments are. So I think the tragedy in Nigeria, there's a lot of parallels, but I think our political scientists on the continent will have to be very, very innovative in trying to shape the future of government or the future of democracy on the continent, with a huge focus on making sure that the governments work for the people, that the governments do not work for the few economic elites or for the few kleptocrats who want to take power so that they can enrich themselves. How do we make that turn around? How do we make the vote count for the ordinary citizens? Otherwise, I think we're going to end up with revolutions, which are economic revolutions led by frustrated hustlers who think we've elected people into power to stabilize the economies, to make sure the economies work, to make sure the prosperity is shared, to make sure that economies are inclusive. And once they're frustrated for that, they'll think, let's destroy this for everyone. And we are seeing that trend is going to be across the continent. So we really have to rethink our direction, politically speaking.
You brought up something about ideology, and perhaps you can assist us with this analysis from a governance point of view. When it comes to the personality-driven politics vis-a-vis the ideology politics, what exactly applies in Nigeria? And perhaps looking at the history of Nigeria, he mentioned the military junta. Did this have a part to play? Is it the same as we see right here in the country, that political actors frequently cross party divides, whichever favors them, depending on the stage of their career? What do you say about this?
Abraham Lincoln, in his second inaugural after the Civil War, gave the best speech I've ever read. If I can remember it. He said, with charity to all and malice towards none, and with the firmness of the righteousness of how God has made us, if I can paraphrase it, see that righteousness. What Nigeria needs right now is a political leadership that thinks about the nation. You see, there's a difference between the nation and parts of it. In Kenya, we think of Kenya as not as a nation, but we think of Kenya as parts of nations. But our boundary, Kenya is a very unique country. Kenya is a very Kenyan and very patriotic. But on the other side of the coin, simultaneously, they're extremely exclusivist tribal kingpins. And if you try to encroach on that area, there's a huge reaction to it. So there's a war of ethos and pathos within our own society. And that's going on in Nigeria as well. It is a significant part of the Weltanschauung, or the worldview of the post-colonial state. Because what are we trying to do? We're trying to form a nation. But you don't form nations from nations. You form nations from parts. Because you have to put the parts together to form this nation. It doesn't come from the sky. It comes from Gikuyus, Luyas, Somalis, Kambas, whatever ethnic group you are. Putting that together is the great project of Nigeria. They have hundreds of ethnic groups with hundreds of different religions, different traditions, different histories. There were nations that are inside Nigeria that were forged hundreds of years ago. The Igbos, all these other nations. So bringing Lord Lugard, Nigeria is a night dream of Mr. Lugard. You read about him in school?
Your mandate.
Yes, he's the guy who brought it together. So, from a governance point of view, what you need is a political leadership that forges a nation, that forges an economy, and forges an identity. And that needs something called a myth. A myth. If you have a myth, you can forge a nation. Abraham Lincoln teaches that in his text in the second inaugural. And every university student in this country should have that on the reading list, because it's probably the most amazing speech I've ever read. And I think that if we get the myth right in Kenya, if we get the myth right in Nigeria, we can create our totem poles of our vision about East Africa. We can create the totem poles of a vision of a West Africa. The Europeans and the Americans and the Chinese and the Japanese are not going to save us. They will not. We have to save ourselves. Our redemption has to come. Do not come from the mosque, do not come from the church, that's your personal view. But it will come from the myth of our politicians and our leaders to create the myth of our country. We had a chance in 1960 under Jomo Kenyatta and Mr. Odinga. And we had a nice, great story about our country. We had just come from a revolution. We had overthrown the colonial system. The Mau Mau were forging a nation together with their fellow Kenyans. And suddenly, the Cold War came and said, no, we're not going to happen. The Cold War did that to Nigeria as well. But that's not an excuse. When we forge our nationalisms and we forge our myths, we can create citizens. We can create our economy. We can create, give people a chance not based on coming from Ngong, but based on what is it that he can do for your country, as John F. Kennedy used to say.
Now, I think I want to repeat myself by quoting Chinua Achebe again, that the trouble with Nigeria is simply and squarely a problem of leadership.
That's exactly what it is.
You can say the same for Africa. The trouble with Africa
Is leadership.
is simply and squarely a problem of leadership. And what we are finding with Nigeria, and I want to take it over from where Hashi has left, because I think one of the reasons why I wake up in the morning to come for this program is that at least it allows space for some intellectual bait. And I'm happy John is coming into the realm from that perspective. Now, the myth. Kenya is not a state. It's a state of nations. It's not a nation. We don't have a nation here. We are into the process of creating a Kenyan nation, but so far we are comfortably a state of nations. Right? The Ruya nation can stand by themselves. Population-wise, they are almost the size of Rwanda or any other small African country. Djibouti is only 940,000 people. Mauritius is 1.2, the size of Muranga, 1.2 million people. Comoros is even smaller. Seychelles, I think, is more like a village, my Rwadia village, right? And there are countries which are in the United Nations and voting. Yeah. Therefore, any community in Kenya can actually make a nation. This is what we're saying. But we decided that we are going to move together. The problem we have had is that we did not have a myth that unifies us, that is so powerful to overwhelm our ethnic identities or our nation's identities. The Somalis started off badly, basically swimming up the current by saying we are a Somali nation. They tried. In Djibouti, in Ethiopia, in Kenya, we are all Somalis. And they created a star with 5 points, which enabled them to bring home all the Somalis. What did they do? They ran counter to the African vision of the time, as enunciated by Kwame Nkrumah and others, that Africa must unite or we perish. If we are on these borders, we concentrate on who is where and who is not where, we are missing the point. Correct. That's where we come up with the whole issue of the regional citizenship. The nonsense we are having in this region, talking about the Congolese and the Rwandese and all, it is because we lost the vision of Kwame Nkrumah. Yep. Kwame Nkrumah had a myth and gave it to the continent, published it in his book, Africa Must Unite. And therefore, today, when we go to the African Union, we are all saying we are going for African Summit. We are going for this because we think we are Africans and we believe we are Africans. That's Kwame Nkrumah, Jomo Kenyatta, George Padmo, and others were able to do that. Here, we have not been able to do that. The difference is one, and I want to say this and stop. William Ruto has that chance. In 2002, as I think the chief ideologue and the thinker for Uhuru Kenyatta, that as a young candidate, managed to turn the pivot of politics from ethnicity to generational contest. So we had, for the first time in this country, an election that was not run on an ethnic platform, but that was run on a youth or a generational platform. It was youth versus the old. Yes, they lost, but the issue was there. Kibaki delivered, therefore, the older generation still reaffirmed itself as the nationalists of the time. That was 2002. In 20 years later, in 2022, Ruto ran an election on a class platform.
Absolutely.
And, and transformed fundamentally the politics of this country from ethnicity to class. And even now, we have not been able to displace the crass analysis that Ruto gave us. And therefore, he has the capacity to come up with a myth that can unify this country. Because we don't need this rationality or whatever. We just need something we believe in. The way the hustlers believe that they are hustlers. Yeah. Today, if you go to any place, go to Kajiado, go to Mbuye, go to Bugoma, you are going to see we hustlers. We hustlers. It's a distinct kind of Kenya. And all of us, even those who have something small, are identifying with the hustlers. Right. Because the hustlers are our mothers, the hustlers are our brothers. So in that regard, therefore, what we need in Nigeria, what we need in Kenya, is a myth of a nation. Correct. So that we rally around it.
I concur. I think we're on our last comment.
Final comments.
Well, I'd like to bring to the notice of the international community, Colonel Musa Bihi in Hargeisa is continuing the war there in the regional capital of Las Anod. The East African community should immediately write a joint statement. The African Union should get involved. IGAD should get involved. The head of the African Union has not said anything about this. I'm not sure he said anything about it. It is outrageous for an administration to go at war with its own citizens. This is the thinking of the 20th century and what we've been talking about here the whole day, about what we should not be doing and why we should not have this type of leaders, people who are empty-headed, who are just brazen enough to just abuse human rights in this way. I think that time is over, and I think the international community, the African Union, and IGAD, and all the organizations should really say something to stop what is happening in Las Anod. It's a tragedy for East Africa.
All right. Daktari, final comment, briefly.
Yeah, I think my final comment is just to summarize a bit what we've talked about, the drought, ongoing drought. So the hunger crisis we are seeing is not a drought crisis, it's a political crisis. And there are dry places in this world. I think we've talked about Saudi Arabia, Northern Africa, Israel. These are dry areas, but no one is dying from hunger. So in a country like Kenya, if people are starving, they are hungry, and they are brink of dying from hunger, it should not be considered as a rain failure. It should be actually seen as a societal failure. Yeah. It's a human failure. It's a government failure. It's a societal failure. And it should be a collective shame if we cannot really step up to do that. I think also the government has, I think I agree with Koganja, Ruto's government has the best opportunity to turn around this country. And I think the problem with the politicians that they are, the perpetual campaign mode continues. But I would beseech him to listen to his Council of Economic Advisors, probably democratize it a bit, diversify it a bit, bring more voices, independent voices around the table, but listen to it. Yeah. I think when you look at economies that work, whether it was Obama or Biden, immediately you win power, you put around critics who think for you, and they help you interrogate how you translate your promises to the citizens into practical social and economic policies. And I think that's what we're lacking in Kenya. The president should listen to his economic advisors, but also try to democratize it, diversify the people who surround him, so that we can turn this country around, save lives for the immediate term, but also help this grow the economy, so that we can create jobs, as Hashi keeps reminding us, but also make sure that the safety nets work for the masses. So I think that's for me what I'll focus on. But otherwise, if we let things degrade the way they are and people start dying from hunger, it should be something that we are all ashamed and embarrassed of as a nation.
Well then, Daktari.
We have two candidates.
Just briefly,
yeah, we have two candidates for Nobel Peace Prize from this region after Abiy Ahmed. No, I'm not there. I'm on the peace and development issue. The Yongo is developing the mind. Now, first is Hassan Sheikh in Somalia. If we manage to deal with Al-Shabaab and move beyond war into peacemaking,
He'll be big.
He'll be a candidate for Nobel Peace Prize. The second is William Ruto. If he makes his hustler fund works, then he give legs to his hustler ideology and give teeth to an ideology that at the moment is not really working very well because of poverty. I think those are my remarks.
Thank you. Short and sweet. So much
You
to
did
talk
well,
about.
Rogers.
So little time. I finally have been inducted into the group. Asante sana. We'll shake hands there after. Thank you for your time and your input right here, Professor Peter Kagwanja. We definitely appreciate you. Ahmed Hashi, Asante sana, and Dr. John Kitui. I think you should make a frequent, yeah, it should be a frequent right here.
We will support that.
Unanimously.
Support that motion.
Okay. Gentlemen, thank you so much. And to our viewers, I hope you're adequately informed about the global matters